Chapter 31. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It's you again, you old hag. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Fangya looked at Wu Wei calmly. I can't just stand by and watch him die, can I? Fangya suddenly felt a little lost. She remembered her previous life. When she was backed into a corner, she had tried to ask Wu Wei to return the items her parents had left for her. However, at that time, Wu Wei had completely ignored her existence and directly kicked her out of the door. Perhaps, the current her was already being merciful enough. She was not kicking him out yet, wasn't she? You started this, you'll solve it yourself, Fangya said coldly. I think the property Dad left you is enough for you to deal with these troubles, Fangya continued to add. It's gone. There's nothing left. Wu Wei roared, his whole being almost manic. Tang Fu cheated me of everything. Wu Wei roared anxiously. It's all because of you. It's all because of you. Wu Wei's voice rose even further. If you had not divorced him. If you had not insisted on taking away his property. He wouldn't. Wu Wei said as he reached out to grab Fangya. Fangya waved her right hand and slapped Wu Wei's face. Pa! It sounded particularly loud in the night. Wu Wei. You're a man. Fangya shouted loudly, don't be unreasonable like a child. Whether Tang Fu and I divorce or not, whether I took his property or not, it's all up to the two of us. Fangya said righteously. You've already taken everything my father left for me. Fangya suddenly laughed. What kind of price tag do you want me to set for you to pay up? Wu Wei was furious after being slapped by Fangya. He fell beyond reasoning. He got up and pushed Fangya away, rushing into the courtyard. Where's Tang Tang? Wu Wei shouted. I don't believe that Tang Fu doesn't care about his daughter. Fangya followed behind Wu Wei in panic. She did not think that he would target Tang Tang. Wu Wei. You can't hurt Tang Tang. Fangya grabbed Wu Wei's arm and tried to stop him. However, Wu Wei had lost his mind. How could he listen to Fangya's pleas? Tang Tang vaguely heard someone calling her, so she opened the door and walked out of the room. He Peng also heard the noise outside and rushed out of the room. Little Peng, bring Tang Tang into the room. Don't come out. Fangya said loudly. When Tang Tang saw Wu Wei, a sweet smile immediately appeared on her face. Uncle Wei. Are you here to play with Tang Tang? He Peng rushed to Tang Tang's side, picked her up, and returned to the room to lock the door. Wu Wei dragged Fangya and walked in the direction of the room. When the large woman's family heard the noise next door, they also rushed over in a hurry. It's that man again. The large woman gritted her teeth, picked up the broom next to her, and smacked Wu Wei. The brooms rained down on Wu Wei, and Wu Wei could not dodge them all in time. The woman's eldest son pulled Fangya aside to prevent her from getting hurt. The woman kept hitting Wu Wei with the broom until he was forced to run out of the house. Wu Wei retreated to the door, held his head, and glared at the woman. It's you again, you old hag. When the woman heard that, she waved the broom again. Who are you calling an old hag? Wu Wei could not react in time and was smacked by it again. He roared angrily, old hag. Don't meddle in other people's business. The woman stuck the handle of the broom into the soil and snorted. Fangya's business is my business. You still want to hurt my future daughter. Law. You're courting death, the woman said angrily. Wu Wei frowned and looked at the large woman, not knowing what she was talking about. Then, Wu Wei shook his arm, which was slightly red from the beating, and said to Fangya, who was panting, just you wait. After Wu Wei said that, he turned around and ran away. Fangya watched Wu Wei leave, and although she finally let out a sigh of relief, the expression on her face did not relax at all. Why is this guy here again? The woman looked at Fangya's nervous expression and asked. Fangya shook her head and did not know where to start. Don't worry. Let's talk inside. I'll accompany you today. The woman said as she held Fanya and walked into the house. Before leaving, she did not forget to tell her son, go home. Remember to lock the door. The woman's son obediently went back home. The woman pulled Fanya into the house and saw He Peng guarding the door on guard. He looked stern and steadfast. Fanya patted He Peng's head to express her gratitude. Chapter 32. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Please, Lin Bin Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The day after Wu Wei came to cause trouble, He Feng came to Fanya's house at noon. I heard that something happened last night. He Feng looked Fanya up and down and asked. Fanya nodded and let He Feng into the house. Wu Wei was here again. What happened? He Feng followed her in and saw the two children eating in the house. Fanya prepared a bowl and chopsticks for He Feng and asked him to eat with her. He Feng did not stand on ceremony and sat at the table. He was swindled by my ex-husband, Fanya told him the truth. He wanted to kidnap Tang Tang to pay my ex-husband back. What? He Feng was shocked and glanced at Tang Tang. Tang Tang did not seem to understand Fanya's words and ate quietly. Do you need my help to solve it? He Feng asked again. Fanya shook her head. No need. I'm heading out this afternoon. I should be able to solve it. He Feng frowned. Although he was a little hesitant, he still nodded. Okay. If you need help, contact me at any time. As He Feng said this, he gave Fanya a phone number. Fanya smiled and put the phone number away. Okay. After lunch, He Feng returned to the station. Fanya entrusted the two children to the large woman to take care of them. She returned to the city alone and headed for Lin Bin's law firm. When she entered the law firm, she saw Xiao Xia reprimanding a new intern with a straight face. Fanya greeted Xiao Xia and walked into the reception room. Not long after, Lin Bin entered the reception room. Miss Fong, what's the matter? Fanya smiled and said, Lawyer Lin, long time no see. Lin Bin smiled very happily. Not seeing me might be a good thing. Fanya smiled as well, but she did not look so relaxed. Lin Bin saw through Fanya's emotions and asked, what's wrong? Did trouble come up? Fanya nodded and said, I ran into some problems and need some advice. Lin Bin immediately put on a professional expression. Tell me the specifics. Fanya told Lin Bin about how Tang Fu had taken Wu Wei to gamble and cheated him out of all his assets. Lin Bin was a little surprised and a little hesitant. CEO Tang couldn't have acted so out of line. Fanya did not explicitly state that she knew that Tang Fu was already going downhill. She only asked Lin Bin to think of a better solution. Lin Bin thought for a moment and said to Fanya, it's best for the person involved to come over personally. Fanya's brows were tightly knitted. She thought that it would be difficult to get Wu Wei to come over. But on second thought, if this matter was not resolved, Wu Wei would forever be a problem. Fanya decided to go look for Xiao Xiang. After leaving Lin Bin's law firm, Fanya went to Xiao Xiang's home. Seeing that the door was ajar, Fanya had a hunch that something had happened. She pushed the door open and walked in. Sure enough, she saw Xiao Xiang sitting on the ground, alone and crying. Fanya walked forward and helped Xiao Xiang up. What's wrong? What happened? Xiao Xiang looked at Fanya. Her face was full of tears. That kid is not human. Wu Wei was here. Fanya asked. Xiao Xiang finally reacted and looked at Fanya. Did he go to look for you too? Fanya nodded and did not intend to deny it. Xiao Xiang cried out in grief. What kind of sin have I committed? How did I give birth to such a thing? Then, Xiao Xiang thought of something and grabbed Fanya's hand. He didn't hurt you, right? Where's Tang Tang? Is Tang Tang all right? Xiao Xiang asked anxiously. Fanya shook her head and said, "Don't worry, Tang Tang is fine." Fanya took out a handkerchief and let Xiao Xiang wipe her face. Then she said, "I came to look for you today because I wanted to talk to you about Wu Wei." When Xiao Xiang heard Fanya's words, she immediately suppressed her crying and looked at her sternly. "Speak." The current Xiao Xiang completely trusted Fanya. If Wu Wei continues like this, he will run himself into a wall sooner or later, Fanya said seriously. "I found a lawyer. Maybe I can help him," Fanya continued to add. "But Wu Wei won't listen to me. I need you to persuade him." Fanya looked at Xiao Xiang, her face full of sincerity. "Remember, tell him not to believe Tang Fu's words anymore." Fanya's expression instantly became serious. Tang Fu has changed. Xiao Xiang listened to Fanya's words with a half-understanding expression, tears silently streaming down her face. Fanya used a handkerchief to wipe Xiao Xiang's tears before saying, "The only one who can help him now is you." Xiao Xiang nodded, picked up the phone at the side, and dialed Wu Wei's home number. Chapter 33. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. A Death Sentence. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The person who answered the phone was Wu Wei's wife. Xiao Xiang was about to speak when the other party hung up the phone as soon as she heard that it was Xiao Xiang. Xiao Xiang sighed and smiled bitterly at Fanya helplessly. Fanya knew that Xiao Xiang had not been happy during the period of time she had spent at her son's house. Otherwise, she would not have been kicked out. However, she did not expect that Wu Wei would treat his mother, who had raised him alone since young, like this. Fanya thought that no woman should ever have to experience this. At that moment, the most important thing was to find Wu Wei. He was like a ticking time bomb that could bring a building upon himself at any time. Fanya simply helped Xiao Xiang tidy up the furniture that had been rummaged through. After asking for Wu Wei's address, she was ready to look for him. Xiao Xiang was worried that Fanya would go alone, so she insisted on following her. Fanya knew that Xiao Xiang was worried about her, so she did not really try to stop her. The two of them went to Wu Wei's house and knocked on the door, but there was no response for a long time. "It can't be that there's no one." Xiao Xiang mumbled in confusion, "There was someone on the phone just now. Could it be that they had something to do and went out?" Xiao Xiang tried to knock on the door again. At this moment, an impatient voice came from inside, "Who is it? Knock knock knock. Is there a fire?" The door was opened. Wu Wei's wife angrily shouted at the person at the door, "If the door is broken, you have to pay for it." When she opened the door and saw that it was Xiao Xiang, Wu Wei's wife's demeanor only worsened. "Why are you here again? Didn't I tell you not to come over if there's nothing else? Disturbing someone else's afternoon nap in the middle of the afternoon. Don't you know how annoying it is?" Wu Wei's wife said angrily, looking like she was not to be trifled with. Xiao Xiang was slightly cowed by her scolding and did not dare to retort. Seeing this, Fanya stood in front of Xiao Xiang and blocked her way. "Are you Wu Wei's wife?" Wu Wei's wife saw the stranger and her expression became slightly dull. Then, in the next second, she pointed at Fanya. "Are you the woman that Wu Wei's seeing outside?" Hearing such a question, Fanya and Xiao Xiang were stunned. "Wu Wei has a woman outside?" Xiao Xiang asked in disbelief. Wu Wei's wife heard Xiao Xiang's words and became even angrier. "He doesn't go home every night. When he does go home, he sleeps like a dead pig." The more Wu Wei's wife said, the angrier she became. "In the past, I could bring home 3 melons and 2 dates every month, but now it's all so amazing. He takes more and more money from home every day." Wu Wei's wife said as she cried in grievance. Listening to Wu Wei's wife's complaints, Fanya realized that this was most likely Tang Fu's doing. "I'm Wu Wei's sister. Although Fang Ye was a little hesitant, she still said it. When Wu Wei's wife heard it, her expression became a little strange. She sized up Fang Ye from head to toe before saying, "You're his very rich sister." "Oh, no, it's a sugar daddy's toy," Wu Wei's wife said as the corners of her mouth curled into a mocking smile. Xiao Xiang's expression became a little ugly when she heard Wu Wei's wife's words. She looked at Fang Ye, as if she was afraid that Wu Wei's wife would anger Fang Ye. Fang Ye took a deep breath and said, "We have something to see Wu Wei about." "Is he at home?" Wu Wei's wife snorted. "How can he be at home at this time? He must have gone to that wild woman's house again," Wu Wei's wife said with a disdainful expression. "Can you contact Wu Wei? We need to find him, it's urgent," Fang Ye emphasized again. Listening to Fang Ye's tone, Wu Wei's wife felt that something had really happened. She looked at Fang Ye suspiciously. "What happened?" "Wu Wei is deep in gambling debt outside," Fang Ye said simply. "Gambling debt?" Wu Wei's wife instantly cried out. "What a fellow! Gambling debt! If he did not pay up, the creditors would catch up to him. That would be the end of their lives." Seeing that Wu Wei's wife seemed to be frightened, Fang Ye said to Wu Wei's wife, "Can you let us in? We must wait for Wu Wei today." Wu Wei's wife hesitated for a moment before saying, "All right, come in." Fang Ye and Xiao Xiang looked at each other before following Wu Wei's wife into the house. Fang Ye looked around the furnishings in the house and found that most of the things in the house were old items left behind by her father. Many of them could be sold for a good price in the future. She did not know if it was because Wu Wei did not recognize the goods, or if he really did not want to sell these things. In short, these things were still there. Fang Ye thanked Wu Wei from the bottom of her heart. Chapter 34. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Come Home with Me Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. It was almost evening when Wu Wei returned home dejectedly. The moment he entered the house, he saw Xiao Xiang and Fang Ye sitting on the sofa. Wu Wei was instantly stunned. "Why? Are you here?" Wu Wei looked at the two of them and asked coldly. Fang Ye stood up and looked at Wu Wei. "Don't trust Tang Fu anymore. Perhaps, I can help you, you." "How can you help me?" Wu Wei was even more frustrated. He squatted beside the cabinet and held his head with both hands. "It's over. I'm really done for this time." Fang Ye walked to Wu Wei and stared at him condescendingly. "I have a way to help you, but you have to trust me." Wu Wei raised his head and looked at Fang Ye. "Really?" Fang Ye nodded and looked at Wu Wei sincerely. Xiao Xiang walked to Fang Ye's side. "You should trust Xiao Ye. She's your sister. She won't harm you." Wu Wei's expression was a little twisted. He stood up and looked at Fang Ye. "All right. Tell me, what should I do? I'll listen to you." Fang Ye gave Wu Wei Lin Bin's contact information. "Tomorrow morning, go see Lawyer Lin at his law firm." Wu Wei looked at the business card. The name written on it looked somewhat familiar to him. "Isn't this Tang Fu's lawyer?" Wu Wei furrowed his brows tightly. "Why are you going back and forth? You still can't avoid Tang Fu." Wu Wei was even more annoyed. "No. He's my lawyer," Fang Ye said solemnly. "I trust him." Wu Wei looked at Fang Ye suspiciously, as if he was trying to figure out whether what she said was true or false. Xiao Xiang looked at Wu Wei's expression and fiercely stepped forward to hit Wu Wei on the head. "Look at yourself. Are you still in any position to choose?" Hearing Xiao Xiang's words, Wu Wei's face drooped again. "All right. I'll listen to you." After settling Wu Wei's doubts, Fang Ye hesitated for a moment and said to Xiao Xiang, "Come home with me today." Xiao Xiang looked at Fang Ye in surprise. "This? I wouldn't be putting you through too much trouble, am I?" That place is too shabby. I think the roof is also broken. It will take 1 or 2 days to get someone to fix it, Fanya continued. It has been cold at night for the past few days. It will be better if you came home with me, Fanya said as she looked at Xiao Xiang's hesitant expression. Then, Fanya said, I've been quite busy with work these few days. I still have to deal with Wu Wei's matters. I don't feel at ease when Tang Tang is alone at home. Can you go over and help me take care of Tang Tang? Fanya asked gently. Xiao Xiang heard this and knew that Fanya was simply making excuses. She looked at Fanya gratefully and said, all right. I'll go back with you. Fanya followed Xiao Xiang back to pack some things and then took a taxi home. This was Xiao Xiang's first time taking a taxi. Her eyes were filled with curiosity as she looked at the scenery outside. When Fanya saw Xiao Xiang's actions, her heart ached slightly. After so many years, Fanya had not fulfilled her duty as a daughter. Although her father and stepmother had not treated her well, they still gave her a place to stay. However, because of the resentment in her heart, Fanya had not contacted them for many years. What her parents could not feel before they died, she now hoped that she could let Xiao Xiang experience it properly. It could also be considered as a token of her appreciation as a daughter. When she arrived at Fanya's residence, Xiao Xiang looked at the large courtyard in surprise. Although it was in the suburbs, such a lot should not have been cheap. Xiao Xiang was slightly relieved that Fanya could live in such a big lot with her child. Before she entered the door, Xiao Xiang heard an excited voice coming from the neighboring courtyard. Ms. Fang. Tang Tang's small body rushed into Xiao Xiang's arms. Xiao Xiang happily hugged Tang Tang, her eyes full of love. He Ping stood at the gate of the courtyard and saw Xiao Xiang hugging Tang Tang, a hint of envy flashed in his eyes. Xiao Xiang led Tang Tang into the courtyard. Fanya thanked the large woman and waved to He Ping. He Ping ran over and followed Fanya into the courtyard. After entering the house, Tang Tang presented her items, one at a time to Xiao Xiang. Xiao Xiang looked at Tang Tang and could not stop smiling. He Ping sat quietly at the side and watched the intimate interaction between Tang Tang and Xiao Xiang. Suddenly, Tang Tang said to He Ping, brother, Ms. Fang asked you to come over. She has something for you. He Ping looked at Xiao Xiang with some surprise. Xiao Xiang smiled and waved at He Ping. He Ping quickly stepped forward and walked in front of Xiao Xiang. Xiao Xiang took out a small cloth bag wrapped in a handkerchief from her pocket. She opened the small cloth bag and there were 2 milk candies inside. Chapter 35. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. What are you hiding? Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Xiao Xiang mysteriously gave the 2 candies to the 2 children. This is something that I just got not long ago. Xiao Xiang said with a smile. Tang Tang picked up the candies, opened them, and put them into her mouth. She smacked the fragrance, looking very intoxicated. He Ping carefully put the candies into his pocket, unwilling to eat them. Xiao Xiang looked at He Peng's expression and felt her heart ache. She patted He Peng's head and asked, where's your father? On the way, Fanya had already briefed Xiao Xiang on He Peng's situation. Knowing that He Peng's parents were divorced and that it was not easy for He Peng to follow his father, Xiao Xiang felt her heart ache. Father is at work, He Peng said with his head slightly lowered. Then do you like Aunt Fang? Xiao Xiang asked tentatively. He Peng raised his head and smiled at Xiao Xiang. I do. Xiao Xiang looked at He Peng's smile and smiled as well. Fanya had prepared dinner and called Xiao Xiang to bring her 2 children to eat together. Xiao Xiang ate Fanya's cooking and the corners of her mouth unconsciously curled up. It seems that Tang Fu has been treating you quite well these past few years. Fanya raised her eyebrows. She did not know what Xiao Xiang was trying to say. All the housework at home was done by the servants, right? Xiao Xiang said with a smile. Fanya suddenly felt a little awkward. I've never been very good at cooking. Xiao Xiang did not continue ridiculing Fanya. She only said, I'll start cooking tomorrow. If you're willing, help me out. Fanya nodded heavily, her eyes filled with gratitude. Her mother had passed away early, so she did not have much opportunity to learn how to cook. Tang Tang liked Xiao Xiang's cooking very much. If she could really learn Xiao Xiang's cooking skills, she believed that Tang Tang would not bother to look for food at the large woman's house in the future. After dinner, He Peng returned to his own room. Fanya coaxed Tang Tang to sleep in her own room. Xiao Xiang was given the room next door. It was not big, but it was very tidy. Xiao Xiang walked in, looked around, and quietly walked to the bedside and sat down. Fanya knocked on the door and walked in. She immediately saw Xiao Xiang sitting by the bedside in a daze. What's wrong? Fanya asked in confusion. Xiao Xiang gently patted the seat next to her and motioned for Fanya to sit down. Fanya walked over and sat down beside Xiao Xiang. Xiao Xiang held Fanya's hand and smiled. I want to thank you for helping Wu Wei out. Also, Fanya stopped Xiao Xiang from continuing. I've gone through some things, and I've also seen some things. There are some things that should be fought for, and I won't give up. Fanya said firmly. And there are some things that if you let go, you'll let go of yourself. Listening to Fanya's tone, Xiao Xiang kept feeling that her words sounded a little like vicissitudes of life. Xiao Xiang did not understand how Fanya would have come to develop such feelings. Are you okay? Xiao Xiang asked, looking at Fanya with concern. Fanya smiled. Everything is in the past. Everything will be fine. Xiao Xiang nodded and said, yes. There are no obstacles that can't be overcome. Everything must be moved forward. Fanya knew that Xiao Xiang had experienced a lot in her life. This was also the reason why she desperately wanted to hold on to everything and not let go. The next morning, Fanya set off to Lin Bin's law firm. Wu Wei obediently appeared at the law firm's door on time. This made Fanya feel somewhat gratified. Let's go. Hear what the lawyer has to say, Fanya said as she brought Wu Wei upstairs. Wu Wei followed closely behind Fanya, as if he was afraid that Fanya would abandon him. Lin Bin saw Wu Wei and asked him in detail about all the details of how Wu Wei was lured into gambling. During this process, Fanya was very calm. No change in her face could be seen. As Lin Bin listened to Wu Wei's narration, the expression in his eyes changed slightly. He said to Wu Wei, go out and wait for a while. I have something to tell Miss Fang. Can I still be saved? Wu Wei looked at Lin Bin with a pleading look. Lin Bin nodded. I'll try my best to help you solve it. Wu Wei listened to Lin Bin's words and obediently walked out of the reception room. Lin Bin looked at Fanya. The expression on his face was a little puzzled. Were you already aware of Mr. Tang doing these things? Fanya shook her head. Not particularly. Lin Bin asked again, these things might send him to prison. Fanya grunted and said, yes, I know. Lin Bin's expression changed again. Miss Fang, I think you're hiding something from me. The corners of Fanya's mouth twitched. It's nothing important. Don't lawyers only look at factual evidence in everything? Fanya smiled. And with a single line, Lin Bin was unable to pursue his line of questioning. Chapter 36 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Worry Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. They left the law firm. Wu Wei did not receive any definite assurances, but it was still much better than letting his imagination run wild. He sincerely thanked Fanya before rushing home. After Fanya returned home, she told Xiao Xiang about the situation. Xiao Xiang held Fanya's hand with gratitude. Fanya, I really don't know what to say. I just. Thank you. Fanya smiled and gently held Xiao Xiang in her arms. Don't worry, he'll be fine. Xiao Xiang fell into Fanya's arms and suddenly burst into tears. Fanya, thank you. Thank you so much. He Feng, who had not appeared for a few days, suddenly appeared in the evening. Xiao Xiang looked at He Feng's tall figure and smiled. He Feng felt a little embarrassed as Xiao Xiang stared at him. In the end, Tang Tang saved him. Uncle He. You're finally here. Tang Tang missed you so much. Tang Tang rushed to He Feng and hugged his thigh. He Feng looked at the small person in front of him and smiled happily. His own son had never expressed his feelings so clearly. On the other hand, Tang Tang's every emotion could be felt clearly. It felt really good. Fanya saw that He Feng had come, so she called him into the house to rest. He Feng looked at Fanya and hesitated for a moment before saying, I have something to talk to you about. Fanya looked at He Feng's serious expression and nodded. She asked Xiao Xiang to help look after the child and followed He Feng to the back of the house. What's wrong? Fanya looked at He Feng's serious expression and asked. Is Tang Fu your ex-husband? He Feng stared at Fanya. Fanya did not deny it. Yes. He is. Fanya nodded and said. Do you still keep in touch? He Feng asked again. Fanya shook her head. No. I haven't seen him since the divorce. You said that the troublemaker Wu Wei from back then was deceived. He Feng confirmed. Fanya paused for a moment before asking, are you taking over Tang Fu's case? Hearing Fanya's question, He Feng shook his head. No. It hasn't reached the case filing stage yet. We've only received a report. Fanya thought about it for a moment before saying, I suggest that you don't get involved in Tang Fu's case. He Feng frowned as he looked at Fanya, not knowing why she would say that. He Feng found it very strange. In the previous cases, Fanya had provided him very important clues. Although she did not give any actual clues, following Fanya's train of thought would always lead to clues very quickly. He Feng did not know how Fanya knew about those things, but it was very obvious that she knew something. He Feng had also suspected Fanya at one point. However, although the train of thought she gave was strange, it also made something very obvious. Fanya was not a criminal. This time, He Feng really wanted to listen to Fanya's opinion and solve this matter as soon as possible. However, he did not expect Fanya to actually dissuade him from this case. Tang Fu's case would be too convoluted. If this case is not handled well, things would get very troublesome. Fanya gave her own advice seriously. Since she had the intention to continue with He Feng, she had to look out for him, right? He Feng thought about it for a moment and said, I don't know what you know, but fighting crime is what I should do, isn't it? Fanya knew that He Feng would definitely not listen to her if she just relied on persuasion. He Feng was a stubborn person and also possessed a strong sense of justice. As long as he knew about the existence of criminals, he would not sit idly by. Fanya was in thought for a moment before she finally sighed. Then promise me that you will not come into contact with Tang Fu alone. No. Not even with two people. Fanya added again. You must have at least 3 people before you approach him. Although He Feng did not understand why Fanya had insisted as so, this was not very difficult to do. In order to make Fanya feel at ease, He Feng gave her his word. Fanya finally felt a lot more at ease. In her memory, the person who investigated this case in her previous life was not He Feng, but his predecessor in the police force. The captain was eventually found dead not long after. Fanya did not want anything to happen to He Feng, especially when she already knew what might happen. Before He Feng left, he looked at Fanya and hesitated for a moment before saying, Thank you for taking care of He Peng for me. The corners of Fanya's mouth curved slightly. You're welcome. He Peng is a great kid. He Feng wanted to ask something, but after hesitating for a moment, he did not say it out loud. After watching He Feng leave, Fanya let out a soft breath. After living for 2 lifetimes, she had finally begun to worry about the safety of a man. Fanya stood at the door, feeling awkward with herself. Chapter 37. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Are you going to be my mother? Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. When Fanya returned to the house, she saw Xiao Xiang looking at her with a smile. Fanya's face was slightly red. She walked to the table, picked up a piece of clothing, and started sewing. Although Fanya was not good at cooking, she was very good at sewing clothes. Over the years, although Tang Fu was rich, many of Tang Tang's clothes had been sewn by Fanya herself. Xiao Xiang looked at Fanya's appearance, then looked at the clothes in her hands, and then smiled. That man looks good. Fanya was stunned for a moment. She slowly nodded with a smile. Yes. He's a good man. When do you plan to? Xiao Xiang hesitated for a moment and did not continue asking. Fanya smiled, knowing what Xiao Xiang wanted to ask, and only said lightly, "Let nature take its course." Xiao Xiang did not ask any more questions. She believed that this was Fanya's own matter. She definitely had her own plans. Fanya calculated in her heart that He Feng should be facing promotion in the next 1 to 2 years. This was the most critical moment for him. She had to think of a way to help him. It was late at night. Xiao Xiang returned to her room to rest. Fanya took Tang Tang in to sleep in her room. Seeing that Tang Tang was asleep, Fanya wanted to see if He Peng was sleeping well alone. Recently, the weather had been unreasonably cold. He was sleeping alone in one of the side rooms. She had to look out for him. Fanya had just walked out of the room when she saw a small figure sitting on a stone bench in the courtyard. Fanya was slightly surprised. She turned around, went into the room, took a piece of clothing and walked out. She came to He Peng's side and gently put the clothes on his shoulders. He Peng did not turn around. He asked, "Aunt Fong, is Ms. Fong your mother?" When Fanya heard this, she did not hesitate. Instead, she shook her head and told him the truth. "Ms. Fong is my stepmother." Stepmother? Is that the wife that your father married after? He Peng turned his head to look at Fanya and asked. Fanya nodded and did not say anything. "Is she good to you?" He Peng asked again. This time, Fanya hesitated. She thought for a moment and then said, "She has been very good to her children. She cares for them very much and takes care of them very much." Fanya avoided the main point and said softly. He Peng did not catch the underlying meaning in Fanya's words. Does every mother treat their children very well? He Peng raised his head and looked at the moon in the sky. I think so. Mothers love their children very much. Fanya replied seriously. But why doesn't my mother love me? He Peng asked with some sorrow in his voice. It's not that your mother doesn't love you. Fanya tried to find the words for a moment and said, she just doesn't know how to love you. He Peng looked at Fanya again. Really? Fanya smiled and asked He Peng, all these years, Daddy hasn't been by your side. Did your mother take care of you? He Peng thought for a moment before nodding his head heavily. But, why didn't Mommy bring me along? He Peng asked the question that had been bothering him for a long time. Perhaps, Mommy feels that she has no way of taking care of you better. Fanya tried to come up with a reason. She knew that this was definitely not the case. However, she could not lie to a child about his only hope for his mother. He Peng grabbed Fanya's hand and asked, then. Mrs. Fong, are you willing to be my mother? He Peng's question stunned Fanya. Then, she smiled and asked, do you want me to be your mother? Yes. He Peng said without hesitation. Fanya reached out and gently stroked He Peng's hair, then said, maybe, one day. Hearing Fanya's words, He Peng did not know what she exactly meant, but he secretly hoped that day would come early. Fanya gently pulled He Peng's small body into her arms. He Peng leaned into Fanya's arms and gently sniffed Fanya's scent. Mrs. Fang, you smell really good. Really? Fanya asked with a smile. It's a mother's scent. As He Peng said that, his eyelids slid shut. Fanya smiled and took He Peng's hand, bringing him back to the room. He Peng obediently climbed onto the bed and let Fanya cover him. Fanya sat at the head of He Peng's bed and gently patted his shoulder. Sleep. You can leave after you fall asleep. He Peng listened to Fanya's words and quietly closed his eyes. Very quickly, he fell into a deep sleep. Fanya looked at He Peng's sleeping figure and could not help but feel a pang in her heart. He Peng was only a 10-year-old child. After encountering a family crisis, he had been able to remain so calm. It was really not something an ordinary child could do. Chapter 38. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Marriage Proposal Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. After the talk with Fanya the night before, He Peng became even more enthusiastic when he saw Fanya the next day. He helped Fanya with this and that, so he was a capable little helper. Xiao Xiang looked at He Peng and smiled at Fanya. This boy is much more proactive than his father. Fanya looked at He Peng's diligence and shook her head while sighing. He's just a poor child. Let's give him a complete home as soon as possible, Xiao Xiang suggested again. Fanya shook her head helplessly and did not answer. This matter was not something that she could decide alone. He Peng was so busy that he was nowhere to be seen. It was not easy to talk to him. Who knew that Fanya was still hesitating and did not have time to communicate with He Peng? He Peng had given Fanya a surprise that night. Fanya was walking home from the neighborhood committee and chatted with her neighbors on the way. The neighbor's son had just entered college recently, so he was so excited that he had to tell everyone. Fanya was genuinely happy for him, and the smile on her face was sincere and gentle. A few busybodies passed by, and when they saw Fanya, they could not help but gossip. Hey, is she divorced with a child? A woman used her arm to rebuke the person beside her. That's right. I heard that her husband won most of their property. Another woman also started to discuss. I think it's because she wanted to hook up with a rich man. The woman continued to say. A few people who were familiar with her also echoed, this marriage and divorce business is all done by improper women. Exactly. She even stole the child away. I heard she has a daughter. A woman glanced at Fanya and said. Another woman immediately added, oh no, don't you think of it. Fanya's expression changed slightly, but she did not immediately snap back. It was just some hearsay coupled with some wild guesses. Fanya inwardly told herself not to take those words to heart. Then, a woman deliberately said loudly, I heard that a few days ago, a man went to smash her door. One of her many victims, right? Seeing that Fanya had no reaction, the other woman also became unscrupulous. I don't know. Anyway, it caused quite a stir. Later, he was chased away by her neighbors. The woman from before curled her lips with some disgust. Some who were familiar with the large woman could not help but complain, she is just too enthusiastic. She doesn't even know what kind of person she is, yet she still insists on helping out. She appears to be quite gentle and quiet. How did she commit all those depravities? Some who did not understand the reason also came over to ask. The neighbor who was talking to Fanya looked at Fanya somewhat awkwardly. That. I'm sorry, the neighbor said with a face full of guilt. Fanya shook her head. It's okay, they can say whatever they want. I can't shut them up either. It's not the truth either. Let them be happy gossiping amongst themselves. Fang Ye comforted the neighbor. The neighbor still looked at Fang Ye apologetically. Fang Ye shook her head and walked toward her home under everyone's gaze. Just as she reached her door, Fang Ye heard those women still talking behind her. Fang Ye did not want to argue with them, so she pushed the door open and was about to enter. At that moment, a male voice called out to her, "Fang Ye." Fang Ye turned her head to look. It was actually He Feng. He Feng walked forward and said without even looking at those women, "I want to talk to you about our marriage." Fang Ye was shocked and stared at He Feng with her eyes wide open. When the surrounding women heard this, they were also so shocked that their mouths flew wide open. They knew about He Feng. He was the most recent celebrity among the City Public Security Bureau. Not only had he solved a series of big cases, but he had also even been promoted. Such a person was rarely ever seen, even if they sought him out. Who would have thought that this person would actually discuss marriage with Fang Ye in broad daylight, in front of them? Fang Ye swept her gaze across the surrounding women, and a bad feeling immediately welled up in her heart. However, what did it have to do with her what others thought and said? Fang Ye returned to her senses and smiled at He Feng. "Come in and talk." The two of them entered the courtyard together and closed the main door, blocking the pairs of prying eyes outside. Fang Ye led He Feng into the house. Tang Tang saw He Feng and threw himself at him. He Peng was still standing respectfully to one side. Chapter 39. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Are you two getting married? Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Fang Ye gave Xiao Xiang a few instructions. Xiao Xiang then brought the two children to the west room to read some books and newspapers. Xiao Xiang poured a glass of water for He Feng and sat down. He Feng looked at Fang Ye, his eyes flashing slightly. The two of them did not speak for a moment. The air froze for a moment, and both of them felt a little awkward. After a moment, Fang Ye spoke first. "You don't have to care too much about what those people said, and there's no need." He Feng stopped Fang Ye and said, "It's not because of them." Fang Ye raised her eyebrows slightly, not knowing what He Feng was going to say. He Feng pondered for a moment and suddenly gulped down a cup of water. He Feng placed the cup on the table and held his breath before saying, "I'm not a good talker, and I don't know how to get along with women. I'm too busy at work right now, and I really can't spend too much time with you." He Feng thought about it for a moment and continued, "But I know that you're a good woman. He Peng likes you very much too." He Feng added. Then, He Feng took a deep breath and asked, "So, I want to ask you this, can you marry me?" Hearing He Feng's words, Fang Ye hesitated for a moment and nodded. "Okay." Hearing that, a smile immediately appeared on He Feng's face. His stern face suddenly became much gentler. He Feng wiped the sweat from his forehead and said, "Then, I will arrange the wedding as soon as possible. If you have any requests, just say it." Fang Ye shook her head and said, "There's no need to go through so much trouble. We are both going through second marriages. There are some things that can be avoided." Fang Ye looked at He Feng and said seriously. "No way." He Feng shook his head heavily and said disapprovingly, "Even if it's a second marriage, it has to be a proper one." Fang Ye knew that He Feng was sometimes stubborn, so she relented. "It's up to you," Fang Ye said obediently. He Feng grinned even more broadly. Just then, He Peng suddenly pushed the door open from outside. "Dad, Mrs. Fang, are you really getting married?" He Feng turned his head and glared at his son. "Young man. How dare you eavesdrop outside the door?" "I didn't." He Peng immediately denied. "Are you a liar?" Fang Ye also looked at He Peng with slight anger. He Peng immediately cowered. "Ms. Fang asked me to tell you that dinner is ready. I didn't mean to eavesdrop." Fang Ye's expression eased slightly. She took 2 steps forward and said to He Peng, "You can't lie, understand?" He Peng nodded heavily, and then asked again, "Are you really going to get married?" Fong Ye nodded and said, yes. He Ping immediately jumped up, turned around, and ran to the kitchen. Miss Fong. Daddy and Mrs. Fong are getting married. I'm going to have a new mother. He Ping shouted excitedly. Xiao Xiang held a spatula and poked her head out of the kitchen. Really? Then I'll fry a few more dishes. We'll eat later. Tang Tang walked out of the house and looked at the excited He Ping in a daze, then looked at the kitchen. Miss Fong, is there anything delicious? Fong Ye looked at the chaotic house and turned to He Fong with a helpless and resigned smile. He Fong also had a smile on his face. He seemed to have never seen such a smile on his son's face. He had also never felt such a lively atmosphere at home. Perhaps, his marriage to Fong Ye would bring some excitement to his life. The family gathered around the table and happily ate a meal. He Ping could not hide the excitement on his face at all. Xiao Xiang also looked at He Fong and then at Fong Ye, and the corners of her mouth could not help but smile. Tang Tang looked at the strange smiles on the adults' faces with a confused look and also giggled. Fong Ye and He Fong occasionally looked at each other, and both of their faces were also all smiles. The meal was very enjoyable, making He Fong feel the taste of home that he had not felt for a long time. It was late at night, and Fong Ye sent He Fong off. The two of them walked to the entrance of the courtyard. He Fong gathered his courage and held Fong Ye's hand. I'll arrange everything as soon as possible. Fong Ye nodded. I'll wait for you. The two of them said their goodbyes, and He Fong left under Fong Ye's gaze. The next day, the large woman came to Fong Ye's house and chatted with Xiao Xiang. Although the two of them were more than 10 years apart in age, they had a lot of common topics to talk about. The woman only knew that Xiao Xiang was Fong Ye's stepmother, so she was not very clear about Xiao Xiang's past. As the two of them chatted, Xiao Xiang brought up the marriage between Fong Ye and He Fong. What? The two of them are getting married. The woman stared at Xiao Xiang with her eyes wide open. That's great. The woman slapped her thigh and said cheerfully. Xiao Xiang also nodded with a smile on her face. Lo. Chapter 40. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Little Wong's Counterattack Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The news that Fong Ye was getting married soon spread around the neighborhood through the large woman's mouth. Fong Ye, who had wanted to get married in a low-key manner, had now become a hot topic of discussion. The neighborhood committee was a place with many people and many mouths. It was inevitable that Fong Ye would hear some gossip inside. Although she did not care about how others judged her, she would not allow anyone to slander her family. Fong Ye packed her things and saw two women who had previously gossiped about her walking in. Ah, Sister Nyo is not here. A woman looked at Fong Ye in the distance and said. Little Wong sat in her seat and asked the woman, may I help you? I'm here to ask if we have an infestation problem, the woman raised her voice and said. Little Wong frowned slightly. She looked at the woman and asked, what infestation? The woman snorted and said, precisely, I'm asking. I heard some rodents of questionable morals have been running about lately. I'm here to prepare ahead of a rainy day. The woman said, proud that she had used the right idiom. Little Wong's expression became a little strange. What are you talking about? We're all neighbors. It's best not to talk about such nonsense, Little Wong warned. What nonsense? I'm afraid that someone will corrupt the culture here. Am I wrong? The woman glanced at her companion. The woman beside her echoed, that's right. Every family's children are watching. Men come and go every day. Fong Ye took a deep breath and ignored their conversation. Little Wong looked at the two women and suddenly became angry. Do you even know what you're saying? Why wouldn't we? The woman glared at Little Wong angrily. Then, she glanced in Fong Ye's direction. If you don't want tongues to wag, stop wagging your hips about. Little Wang's expression suddenly became even uglier. I think you guys have nothing better to do and decided to waste my time instead. You haven't forgotten to feed the children at home, right? That woman is a disaster if she stays here with us. The woman said fiercely. Right. That's right. We have to kick her out. The other woman also became high-spirited. Little Wang narrowed her eyes. Don't go too far. Hey, we aren't even talking about you. Why are you so anxious? One of the women sneered at Little Wang. Little Wang frowned and looked at the two women. People like you who criticize others are the most annoying. Little Wang was a young lady with a short temper, to begin with. These women spoke openly and secretly, and their eyes kept darting to Fangya. Everyone knew who they were talking about. Little Wang was somewhat dissatisfied with Fangya because of He-Feng's matter. But after all, marriages between a man and a woman were never forced affairs. Little Wang hated these women who did not have any ability other than jabbing at people with their sharp tongues. Sister Nyo had taught her much about restraint, so Little Wang did not charge into the battlefield just yet. Now that these people were openly insulting her colleagues in front of her, Little Wang naturally would not sit idly by. Let me tell you, our neighborhood committee functions to serve the community. Little Wang squared her shoulders and looked at the other party. If you dare to spread rumors here, I will call the police to arrest you. Hearing Little Wang's words, the two women immediately panicked. They shrank back slightly. We only spoke the truth. That's right. It's all the truth. The two women encouraged each other. Little Wang did not care about that. He said with a serious expression, if you have no evidence, you are committing defamation and fraud. The two women were scared. They immediately muttered, I still have something to do at home. Then, they hurriedly ran away. Little Wang watched the two women running away in a hurry. She patted the non-existent dust off her hands, sat back in her seat, and continued to work. Fangya saw Little Wang's relieved look from afar, and the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. Little Wang. Fangya called out softly. Little Wang turned her head and glared at Fangya. She snapped at her. What? Fangya held back a smile. Thank you. Little Wang snorted, ignored Fangya, and turned her head. The next moment, Little Wang's lips also curled up into a smile. A moment later, Little Wang finally could not hold it in anymore. She rushed to Fangya's table. Are you really going to marry He-Feng? Fangya looked at Little Wang in surprise. Then, she nodded with a smile. Little Wang pouted and said, what a pity. I was hoping for a chance. Fangya saw Little Wang's expression and apologized, I'm sorry.